It was an ordinary October evening when Sarah found herself standing in front of the house. The air was unusually cold for late fall, and the wind whistled through the trees like whispers calling out from the past. She glanced back down the narrow, twisting road. There was no turning back. She had left everything behind. Her stressful job, her chaotic apartment, her unsatisfying life. She had come here to start fresh. The house loomed before her, its old wooden structure creaking in the wind. A house that had been abandoned for over a decade. The realtor had warned her about its history, but she hadn't listened. People said it was cursed. Some even claimed it was haunted, but Sarah only laughed. Superstition was for the weak-minded, and she wasn't about to let some ghost story stop her from finally finding peace. Her boots crunched over the dry leaves as she stepped onto the porch. The door creaked open as she pushed it, and the smell of mildew and dust hit her. The air felt thick, like it had been trapped here for years. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but ignored it. The house was eerily quiet. She moved through the rooms, each one covered in dust, the remnants of past lives everywhere. In the corner of the living room was an old piano. The black keys were worn down, some cracked. She walked toward it, her fingers brushing over the keys. No sound. The silence in the house was deafening, and Sarah began to feel the weight of her decision. But she shook off her unease. She was here to stay. That night, Sarah was curled up on the couch with a book, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The wind had picked up, howling against the windows. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the attic. Her heart skipped a beat. She had been so sure that the house was empty. But what was that? Her mind raced, but she tried to calm herself. It was probably just the house settling. But then the whispers started, soft, like a murmur coming from somewhere upstairs. Sarah. It was a soft, slow drawl, like a breathy voice calling her name. She froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. It couldn't be. She was alone. No one was here. She glanced around the room, trying to reassure herself that it was just her imagination. But then it came again. Sarah. This time, louder, almost urgent. Suddenly the door to the hallway slammed shut with a deafening bang. The whispers ceased. Her breath caught in her throat. This was real. Something was in the house with her. But what? The next day, Sarah went into town to grab some supplies, her mind racing. As she walked down the sidewalk, she saw an elderly man standing in front of the general store. He watched her approach. His eyes narrowed, like he had been waiting for her. "You're the one that bought the old Carter house, aren't you?" he asked, his voice gravelly, almost threatening. "Yeah, that's me," Sarah replied, trying to keep her composure. "Is there something wrong with that?" The man's eyes darkened. "That house isn't like the others. There's something you won't understand until it's too late." Sarah's stomach twisted. She had heard the rumors, but she didn't believe in ghosts. She smiled nervously and turned to leave, but the man's words haunted her. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he muttered under his breath. Determined to find out what was really going on, Sarah ventured into town the next morning. She went to the local library and sifted through old newspapers, eventually finding articles about the Carter family, the previous owners of the house. The family had been well known in the town, but one fateful night, they disappeared without a trace. No one knew what happened to them, and rumors began to spread. Some said they were victims of a brutal crime. Others whispered about paranormal activity, and a few even claimed the family had been taken by some kind of curse. But one article stood out. A local historian had written a book about the disappearance. The book was old, yellowed with age, but Sarah borrowed it, hoping it would shed some light on the mystery. As she skimmed through the pages, she found an account that made her blood run cold. The historian mentioned a tragic event, a fire that destroyed part of the house many years ago. The Carter family had been living in the house when the fire occurred, but curiously, no one had ever found the source of the blaze. The family had perished in that fire, and their bodies were never recovered. One part of the account made her freeze. It is believed that the souls of those lost in the fire are trapped within the house, bound by a curse. They seek out new souls to replace their own, feeding on the fear of the living. That night, Sarah returned to the house, more determined than ever to uncover the truth. She knew she couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The whispers, the visions of the girl, the shadows that followed her everywhere. The house wanted something from her, and she needed to understand what it was before it was too late. As the night wore on, Sarah made her way to the attic once again. The air was suffocatingly cold, and the shadows danced on the walls. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. "Who are you?" she whispered to the reflection, her voice trembling. The mirror crackled, and for a split second, her reflection grinned back at her. Then, something inside the mirror began to shift, and the girl from her vision stepped out of the glass, her eyes hollow with despair. "You have to leave. It's coming for you," the girl whispered. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. The floor beneath Sarah's feet groaned, and the walls seemed to close in around her. The house was alive with movement, like it was breathing. A deep guttural growl filled the air, and the girl vanished into the shadows. In that moment, Sarah knew the house wasn't just haunted. It was a predator, and she was its prey. Frantic, Sarah searched the house, her heart racing. The walls seemed to pulse as though the house itself was alive, feeding off her fear. She remembered the words from the history book. The house seeks souls to replace those it lost. Then it hit her. She had been chosen. Her connection to the house wasn't just a coincidence. Her family had once lived in this town, generations ago. They had once known the Carters. They were part of the history that bound the house. Her ancestors had left, but now the house was calling her back. As the whispers grew louder, she realized that if she didn't leave soon, she would become another soul trapped in the house, forever lost to the curse. Sarah made a run for the front door, but the house fought back. The door slammed shut before she could reach it. The walls creaked, and shadows reached out to pull her in. She was trapped. But then, in a final act of desperation, Sarah remembered something she had overlooked: the piano in the living room. She raced toward it, the whispers now deafening, the presence of the house closing in on her. She struck the keys in a frantic, chaotic rhythm, her fingers moving without thought. Suddenly, the house seemed to recoil. The ground trembled beneath her feet as if the very foundation was crumbling. The whispers turned to screams. And then, silence. When Sarah opened her eyes, the house was eerily still. She looked around and realized she was no longer in the house. She was standing in the woods, the night air cold and silent. Had she escaped? But when she glanced at her reflection in a nearby puddle, her heart stopped. The girl from the attic, the one who had been haunting her, was standing beside her, smiling. She realized, too late, that the house had taken what it needed, her soul. Sarah was now trapped in the same way, a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the corner of someone else's life, and the cycle would begin again. Claire Grayson's life had never been the same since that night. The night when her sister Lily vanished without a trace on Halloween 2005. The chilling silence of that night haunted Claire every moment since. She moved to Brooklyn, trying to escape the nightmare, trying to outrun the shadows of the Hollow, the crumbling building where Lily had disappeared, swallowed by a curse that seemed impossible to break. But no matter where she went, the pull of that dark place followed her. It was on another cold evening, years later, that Claire received a call that would change everything. Her mother's voice, trembling, filled the silence of the phone. "Claire, come home. The past, it's not done with us. It's never been done." The weight of those words crashed down on her. She knew what she had to do. She had to go back to the Hollow. The place that had taken Lily, the place that had stolen her sister and yet had never let her go. Claire had to face the truth. She had to find the answers, and maybe, just maybe, she could finally break the chains that bound her. The night was eerily still as Claire stood before the Hollow, the building's twisted silhouette looming over her. It seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, as though it was alive, breathing in the cold air. The wind whispered through the streets, and the city was unnervingly quiet. As Claire stepped closer, a shiver crawled up her spine, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The door creaked open, as though it had been waiting for her, its rusted hinges groaning in welcome. The darkness inside the Hollow seemed to draw her in like a force, as if the building itself was beckoning her to uncover its deepest secrets. Claire hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Dust danced in the faint light that seeped through cracked windows. Claire's footsteps echoed as she made her way down the long, narrow hall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Every corner seemed to conceal a memory, a shadow, a whisper. The building was alive with the weight of its past, alive with grief. When she reached the basement, the temperature dropped significantly. The air was frigid, suffocating. The faint light from a flickering bulb cast long, grotesque shadows across the walls. That's when she saw it. A small, forgotten door in the far corner, half hidden by the shadows. Her heart raced as she approached. The handle was covered in rust, but when she turned it, it gave way with a sickening groan. The door opened to reveal a narrow, winding corridor. The walls were covered in strange, twisted symbols. Symbols that seemed to move, writhing as though alive. The air felt thick with a dark, oppressive energy. In the center of the room stood an altar, covered in burnt candles, brittle bones, and tattered cloths. Claire's stomach churned, but something beyond fear pulled her forward. A force she couldn't explain drove her to the altar, where an old, leather-bound book lay open, its pages yellowed with age. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, the silence around her broken only by the rapid beat of her heart. Each page contained the name of a missing person, each one tied to the Hollow. Each entry had a date: Halloween night, last seen in the Hollow. As her eyes scanned the pages, Claire's breath caught. At the very end, written in ink that seemed to burn her skin, was her sister's name, Lily Grayson, disappeared on Halloween night, 2005. The building claimed her. The curse is incomplete. She is the key to breaking it. The words burned into Claire's soul. The curse was real, and Lily had been the final sacrifice. Before she could process what she had just read, the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, and then it appeared. In the doorway, standing motionless, was Lily, or what had once been Lily. Her face was hollow, her eyes empty, filled with sorrow and something else, something darker. Claire's throat tightened, her eyes filling with tears. She whispered, "Lily, I found you." But Lily's form flickered, her voice coming through as a soft, broken whisper. "I'm not her anymore. The hollow. It's taken me. I can't leave, Claire. I can't." The words tore at Claire's heart. "No, I'll bring you back. I won't let you stay here." Lily's face softened, her eyes briefly filled with a flicker of recognition. But then, the truth came crashing down. "You can't break it. You can't undo what's been done. You have to let go. Let go of me. Let go of everything we lost." Claire fell to her knees, her heart breaking all over again. The years of grief, the endless nights of wondering, all of it had led her here. But now she had to face the truth. She had to let go, to release her sister from this curse. "I love you, Lily," Claire whispered through her tears. "But I have to let you go. I have to move on." And as she spoke the words, Lily's figure began to flicker, her ghostly form dissolving into the air. The building groaned around her, its grip on Claire weakening. But the curse wasn't done. It wouldn't be done until Claire let go completely. She stood, her legs shaking beneath her. With a final, desperate push, she ran through the crumbling halls of the hollow, the walls closing in around her, the building groaning with fury as if trying to stop her. With one last burst of strength, she broke through the front door and stumbled into the cold night, gasping for breath. For a moment she thought she was free, but then the memories returned, of her sister's ghost, of the curse, of the building that would never truly let go. One night, unable to shake the feeling that the curse still lingered, Claire returned to the hollow. The streets were unnervingly silent as she walked toward the decaying building. The faint light of a candle flickered in one of the upper windows, though there were no longer any residents. A chill ran down her spine. She wasn't alone. The door creaked open, as if waiting for her to enter. The moment Claire stepped inside, the oppressive darkness hit her like a wall. The silence was suffocating. She made her way to the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. She had to face it once again, the place where Lily had last been seen. The air grew colder, heavier as the elevator ascended. And then, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." When the elevator doors opened, Claire's heart skipped a beat. The hallway was dark and abandoned, but something was wrong. At the end of the hall, her old apartment door was ajar. She approached cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, a figure stood in the shadows. It wasn't Lily. It was something else, something far worse. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. Its grin was twisted, grotesque, and it whispered, "You cannot escape, Claire Grayson. You are ours." The walls trembled as the entity moved closer, its form flickering with darkness. Claire could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her, suffocating her, but she wouldn't give in. Not this time. "No!" she shouted, her voice shaking but strong. "I'm not yours, I'm free!" The entity writhed in pain, its form flickering violently. The building screamed in fury as the walls shook. But Claire stood her ground. She had already let go once. She would not become another victim. With one last scream, the entity disintegrated into the shadows, the room falling into an unsettling silence. Exhausted, Claire collapsed on the cold floor, her body shaking with relief. It was over. The curse was broken. The next morning, Claire stood outside the hollow, watching the first rays of dawn spill across the city. The building was silent now, empty, lifeless. For the first time in years, Claire felt the weight of her sister's memory shift. It was no longer a curse. It was a memory of love, not loss. And for the first time in years, Claire felt free. But somewhere deep inside her, she knew the hollow would never truly leave her. And neither would the memories of her sister.